Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Stephan Loerke, CEO of WFA, or the World Federation of Advertisers. Stephan, welcome to the show. It's always a pleasure to see you. And for those who are seeing the video, I absolutely love your new offices and the orange background.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for having me. A pleasure to connect.
Yeah, always is a pleasure. Always is a pleasure. Well, look, before we start with your thoughts about the year ahead, let's turn to the past year because I know you've just talked about what an energetic year it was and energizing for you personally. But how would you characterize 2022 for global marketers?
That's a tough one. I'd call it turbulent. I'd call it turbulent because when you just think back, and we were in December, when you think back at what the beginning of the year looked like, we were still in lockdown. I mean, we were in lockdown until March in most of the countries. We came out of lockdown and immediately had this horrible Russian invasion of Ukraine and the violence suddenly on screens that you hadn't seen in ages. And then the energy crisis, and then the global inflation, and moving from being upbeat on the economy to being actually quite uncertain about what's in store for us next year. So I'd call it turbulent. Given all this, I'd call it turbulent. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And so what happens? Where do you go from turbulence? Let's hope it's somewhere up. But before we get to some of that, I know one of the things that did come out of this year for you, despite all of that, is the advocacy that you have for the WFA Planet Pledge and so much of your involvement with climate change. And I noticed that even this year you were quite active with the UN Climate Change Conference. And you've also talked a little bit about a green hush. So could you talk about that then in the context of what you're doing and maybe that transition from 22 to 23?
Yeah, maybe just to clarify, it's been turbulent, but that doesn't mean that we're done beat. With turbulence comes change. With change come sometimes better things. So we are always keen to look at the opportunities at times of change, and one of the opportunities you're touching upon is the climate crisis. So we're starting to see the very real consequences of climate change. We've seen terrible hurricanes in the US. We've seen floodings in Pakistan. We've seen heat waves across Europe. So people start being impacted in their lives by the climate crisis, and that makes the climate agenda all the more urgent. And we're absolutely convinced at WFA that brand marketers have actually a role to play, and that the climate agenda can also be an agenda of opportunity and growth. And that's really what the Planet Pledge is all about. I was actually at my first ever climate conference back in 2021 in Glasgow, COP26. I went to the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and I've learned a lot. I'd never been in that type of summits. I didn't know what to expect, and I've been absolutely impressed by the opportunities there are for brand marketers to team up with all sorts of stakeholders in order to drive that agenda in an effective manner going forward. And one of the things that struck me most, because I wasn't sure what to expect, is the degree to which stakeholders, academics, regulators, politicians are looking at brand marketers as allies, potential allies in this climate crisis. Now, we in our industry tend to be at times a bit defensive when we think about that. Many stakeholders understand that brand marketers will be part of the solution because it is brand marketers that have the ability of driving consumer behavior change. And we all know that in order to drive that transition, there needs to be change at scale in terms of consumer behavior. And that's what brand marketers are best at. So this is really where we're coming from. This is very much where we're playing. Now, you were referencing this green hush phenomenon, it's quite interesting when you look at how brand marketers are looking at the climate agenda. Overall, the vast majority of CMOs feel that they have a role to play. So 90+% of CMOs feel they have a role to play, and almost the equivalent percentage of consumers agree with that. So you'd think, okay, we've got the foundation here to drive action. The reality today is very different. Almost half of consumers feel that the brand marketers make their choices more difficult in terms of adopting sustainable consumer behavior. So there's a sense of confusion. There's a sense of not knowing who to trust. There's a sense of juxtaposition and at times contradiction of messages. And that creates a degree of uncertainty that gets a number of brand marketers to be actually quite defensive and to at times even hesitate to talk about things that they do really well today. That's what we call greenwashing. And we think that needs to be addressed head on in order to unlock that opportunity in two ways. One is we think there's a role for regulators to play. You need to be creating a legal framework that provides legal certainty. And that's happening now in the EU, and we start this work also. We start seeing this work also in the UK. So where legal frameworks are going to be put in place that define what is ethical, what is acceptable, what type of substantiation you need in order to be making green claims. And we welcome that. There needs to be rules that apply across the market to make sure you don't end up being a victim of rogue operators and that you don't start undermining trust of consumers. So that we think that's a very important piece. The other important piece is what the industry needs to do, which is put in place codes of practice and self-regulation codes that are understandable, that are substantiated with case studies that speak to marketers in order to guide them in their choices. And that's what we've released 2 months ago, the first international best practice, not best practices, the first international guidelines in order to avoid greenwashing, substantiated with case studies that is made available to marketers. So this is how we feel we need to be addressing the greenwashing phenomenon that we're seeing, because we want to be unlocking the incredible energy and creativity that we have in our industry.
It's very interesting that you say that, and my mind was racing as you were talking about it, because it reminded me of so many other things. Just as we used to talk about everyone should embrace purpose, should every brand have a green strategy? Should every brand be communicating something of a green nature? I'm just curious.
So I would separate that question into two. One is, should every brand think about the future in terms of climate agenda? My response is yes, because that's the license to operate for every single brand. Within the next 2-3 years, consumers will entirely change the way they're going to be making choices with respect to products and services, and even the legal frameworks will significantly change the environment in which brands can operate. So that is for me hygiene. Every single brand needs to think about that. Now, should every brand today position themselves in terms of green credentials? No. That wouldn't be authentic. That wouldn't necessarily meet consumer expectations, and that isn't necessarily adapted for every single category. However, brands that are in a position to innovate and to outcompete their competitors in those sectors, I would definitely advise that they investigate and explore those opportunities. But I would be very clear. We're not encouraging every single brand to be moving into that space if there's not a sort of very solid reason to do that, and if it's not compatible with their brand heritage and the stuff they stand for.
Right, which goes back to the authenticity of it all. But at the same time, I'm sure that there's issues related to, if it's a consumer brand, packaging, for example, that also add to the sustainability issue and so on, and just the consciousness of that would matter as well. Well, it sounds like that is an initiative that will certainly power you through for the next couple of years. But I also found it quite interesting that you attended a conference where you felt it was entirely new and that you learned so many things. But I do think that some of the things that you were saying about how so many stakeholders are looking to connect more with brands is just so critical as we see business models changing. And I do think that so much innovation comes out of marketing, that marketing might be in a position to do more. I mean, we're seeing more with public sector and private sector, with brands, not for profit,
Yeah, and I mean, I would compare the transition, I call it the green transition that we're starting now. I would compare that to the digital transition that we've had in the decade between 2010 2020. It's a sort of longer journey. It's going to be impacting the entire business, not only marketing. It's going to be redefining how marketing operates. It's going to be redefining also the profile of marketers of the future. And it's going to be a huge opportunity to stand out and win the marketplace. And that's really the angle we want to be taking. We want to. It's not a charitable thing to start embracing that climate agenda. We want companies and brand marketers to think about how they can build business, drive growth by embracing it.
Good point. Good point. I love what you're saying, and I love what you just said about the green transition and the digital transition. I think it suddenly makes it so much more clear. I would love to talk about this forever, but you also did something quite interesting earlier this month, speaking of things in the news, and that was a WFA executive committee met with Twitter's new leadership. And there'll probably be even more Twitter news by the time this is published. But do you want to talk a little bit about that, because that directly connects with GARM, which is again one of your critical initiatives?
Yeah, so brand safety is a very important thing for brands. So the environment in which brands appear on platforms has a huge impact on the reputation of brands. And you know that for the last 3 years, we've been working really, really hard in order to establish a framework that allows ultimately brands to hold accountable platforms in terms of where their brands appear. And we've made very considerable progress over those 3 years. We've been able to bring basically almost the entire ecosystem into one place, which is the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. All the major platforms are there, all the major holding companies, all the major trade associations, and of course the brands through WFA. And what we've been able to do over 3 years is create a framework that is making that accountability a reality across the board. It's on the basis of common definitions. So we now have common definitions that apply to all platforms in terms of what is violent content, what is racist content. So there's now a common understanding of the types of harmful content we're targeting. We have developed common metrics in terms of prevalence and incidence of harmful content. We have built adjacency tools that allow brands to hold platforms to account in terms of what type of risk they're prepared to be taking when they place their brands. And we have commitments in terms of third-party auditing from each of the platforms. One, which is YouTube, have actually already finalized their third-party auditing. Others have committed to a timeline that is not public. So really, really good progress. Now, we've seen a lot in the news, and that's probably an understatement, since Twitter was acquired by Elon Musk. We've seen a lot of concerns expressed by brand owners in terms of Twitter's commitment to brand safety. And we felt that it was important for us to have a dialogue with the new Twitter ownership in terms of their commitment to brand safety and their commitment to GARM. And that has happened in the context of a meeting that took place in the context of the WFA Executive Committee meeting, to which we added the GARM steer team to make sure that the right interlocutors were participating in that Q&A. Now, the dialogue took place on the Chatham House rules, so I'm not going to be referencing any individual. But what I can say is that I've found I found the overall tonality of the conversation. Um, 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 I found it very constructive. Certainly more than what I was expecting. I think we are hearing from the new Twitter ownership that there's a commitment to brand safety and a commitment to listen very carefully to concerns expressed by brands. But we've always made clear that we're not interested in promises. We're actually going to be judging individual platforms, not only Twitter, on actions. That's how GARM has been set up, and that's how GARM has actually progressed. And so we have agreed to sit down with Twitter, both GARM and Twitter, in order to flesh out an action plan and a timeline. And that's going to happen in a relatively short time frame, the timeline. So we're not going to sort of agree on dates in a year's time. It's going to happen in the next 3-4 months. And we're going to be seeing whether those milestones are being delivered. But as we speak, I can tell you that it's a constructive engagement, and there is a willingness on both sides to progress in that direction. And that is for brand owners and for the ecosystem in general. That is rather positive news. But as I said, in the end, we will judge on facts rather than promises.
Now congratulations. That's a wonderful first step. It's quite heartening. And right, actions always speak louder than words. So we'll wait and see, but good for you for taking that initiative and making a very positive first step. Well, I think it might be time to start looking to the year ahead. You said there's something, you used the word juxtaposition in a different context just earlier, but there's another juxtaposition that's going on, and I think you have an opinion on it as we look ahead to 2023. There is economic uncertainty, as you outlined, but you also feel that marketers must embrace a need for sustainable growth. So could you explain those two elements and what that means in the coming year?
Yeah. So when we poll our members, which we do regularly, and we certainly do it every end of the year, the number one priority for every single of our groups is marketing effectiveness. Okay, that's where marketers are in business. Now it's drive growth is drive effectiveness of marketing spend, and that remains the case. When you look at all the other priorities, the ESG priorities, environment, social, and governance, have climbed very considerably. They are now in the top 3 priorities of CMOs, and so as we look at 2023, it is obvious that the ESG agenda is going to be growing even more in terms of importance, because that's the way our society is going. Now, there's increasing expectation with respect to brands, whether that's in terms of environment, we just talked about it, whether that's in terms of social, just think about the diversity and inclusion agenda, whether it's in terms of governance, just think about the brand safety agenda that we talked about. That agenda is going to be gaining further in terms of importance. We have a conviction, and the conviction is that it's not either or, it's actually going to be both. The effectiveness of marketing is going to be driven by the ability to drive an ESG agenda that is successful. And we want to be highlighting the opportunities and the best practices when it comes to the ESG agenda, and the ESG agenda being actually a booster of growth for brands. That's very much our agenda in 2023.
Right, and it would be wonderful to also see some case studies of that as well to make that even more real. Let me move from there, because there's so many items. You're just involved with so many issues. You've also said you think it's a new dawn for data ethics. So here we are continuing a little bit on that ethical theme. Can you talk about what that means as well?
Yeah, so marketers have largely focused their work on privacy because of GDPR, because of CCPA. They basically looked at what does it mean for their business, and how do they comply with the law. But the privacy piece is only a tiny fraction of a much broader discussion around what is a responsible and sustainable manner to collect and use data. And we think that although vast chunks of that are not being regulated today, it's probably going to be the case in 5 or 10 years' time, but today that's not the case. We think that actually future-facing CMOs should start to think about global data, about data ethics, digital data ethics, and data ethics in general, as they look at the opportunities of leveraging tech and data to drive growth. And for me, the approach cannot be only limited to the question of what is going to be the most effective way of collecting data and of using data. That's a very one-sided way of looking at the equation. Brand marketers are in the business for the longer term. They have a relation of trust with consumers, and so they need to be asking themselves in terms of what type of decision would be passing the red face test with consumers. So what can I decide that is actually complying with my commitments, my value commitments to consumers and to people in general, no? And so we want CMOs to start thinking about it in an integrated manner. Now, this is very abstract the way I'm describing it, and so you need to be going a step further down and look at the different questions that companies are confronted with in terms of, for example, using AI in the way they target their messages and the potential unintended consequences of the profiling they're applying, because they simply haven't asked the ethical question in terms of how were those profiles optimized. And so we're talking here about an interface between tech and values. No, it's about making sure that the overall behavior of the brand is actually meeting the expectation of people. And it's not because this happens in the back office that you have free reign as a brand owner. So you need to be able to make those decisions in a manner that is, in a way, in sync with the values that you are incorporating as a brand. And so we have produced a year and a half ago the first of data ethics guide for CMOs, which sort of put that on the radar. Until then, no, it wasn't largely on the radar. It was very much purely a marketing optimization type approach. We've now produced a second guide that actually goes now a step further and illustrates some of the decisions that need to be made in more concrete manners on the basis of case studies. No, and again, we don't think this is how should I say, this is not about legal compliance. There's no law in a number of cases that would restrain marketers. This is about living up to what consumers will be expecting from the brand, and therefore, in the end, building the brand reputation longer term. And we think that ultimately the guardian for that is the CMO, and therefore it needs to start with the CMO recognizing that and the CMO driving it. And that's very much the thinking behind it.
So this might be a simple example, but sometimes you feel you were searching for something online, and you feel that once you found it that you're being followed constantly by digital advertising or digital targeting, no matter what site you go to and so on. I spoke to a head of media recently who actually said to me that one of the things that motivates her is not following people, not using AI or using technology to keep following a customer, but having the courtesy of knowing when it's best not to reach out to someone. And I'm not, I'm trying to take something that's quite theoretical down to earth a little bit. Is that part of the brand trust and part of the consumer responsibility that you're talking about?
I think that's one example. I could give you another one. For example, you're in the insurance business. If you're shaping your product and your pricing on the basis of local targeting, or on the basis of ethnic criteria or on the basis of socioeconomic criteria, you could end up actually having discriminatory pricing practices. Now, it could well be that an algorithm tells you that this is the most effective way of maximizing your profits. What we're saying is think about the ethical implications of what you do before you simply go for a maximization of effectiveness. What you're doing needs to be, in the end, pass the red face test. That's what we're saying. So you need to be able to stand up and say, the way we are marketing with our consumers meets actually our stated values, rather than this is part of a back office optimization that I don't fully understand, that I don't want to hear about, and that simply drives business results. Because brands are in the business for the longer term. It's not only on the short term optimization. You want to make sure that that what you do today is going to be something that is not haunting you in a year or 2 years time, and that you're seen to be the trusted partner that consumers expect you to be.
No, that actually is a very good example. It leads a bit to my next question, because I was going to ask you if you think, I mean, just in listening to this and the elements of balancing technology and ethics, for lack of a better term. I was going to ask you if you think that marketing itself as a discipline has changed, or perhaps the perception of marketing has changed. I was going to ask, really, in the wake of so many crises and new ways of working, but it sounds like it's more than just response to crises. It's also response to an evolution of technology.
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that marketing is changing, and I'm convinced that the perception of marketing is changing, and that's really what makes it exciting to be actually working in marketing right now. I think it's actually very different to what it was 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, our entire conversation so far has been on subjects that you wouldn't have touched upon 10 years ago, I suspect. And that leads to marketing profiles, marketer profiles that change too. And that leads to a perception of marketing that changes too in the outside world. I mean, if you told me 5 years ago that at a climate summit people would be actually looking to brand marketers and say, no, can we team up and we see you as an island? I mean, I would have said, look, I don't believe this. No, so I think we're living in a world that is in flux, put it that way. And the role of marketing, the perception of marketing is in flux too, and that honestly is what makes me excited, because I think there's actually opportunity in some areas to align marketing in a manner that is better meeting aspirations of people and society, and I find that really exciting, and that's what we're trying to do.
That's very interesting. Better meeting the aspirations of people and society. I am just writing that down. But does that mean that marketing is just broader in its definition? Is it more complex? Is it a lot for just one person to handle? Is it someone coordinating a series of specialists? I don't know. I mean, it's fascinating. You're absolutely right. It's absolutely fascinating, and I don't think anyone thought that it would change in scope this quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the role of marketing still remains the same, by the way. I mean, the role of marketing is being able to predict changes and aspirations of consumers faster and better than your competitors, and being able to out-innovate them in order to drive growth. That mandate remains the same. However, the talent, I mean, the profile of the talent that's going to be able to drive that in 2022 or 2023 is very different to what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, you make a wonderful point, a wonderful point. All right, so we've talked about a number of critical issues on the WFA agenda. Now, anything else that you'd like to bring up? I know there's so many.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm personally also quite passionate about the diversity and inclusion agenda at the global level, because you realize that it's a big challenge that we're facing. It has been heavily influenced by the Western agenda, and particularly by the US agenda and the UK agenda. But it's actually a global theme However, it manifests itself in different ways. So because the cultures, the religions, the socioeconomic context, etc., is different, and so we're very keen to champion an agenda that is more diverse and more inclusive, but do that in a manner that is relevant to people in the countries. And so that's why we've run this global DI ad census. So we're basically interviewing people all around the world, so 36 countries, who work in marketing, and we ask them how they perceive their workplace, to which extent it is diverse and inclusive. And we think that in the end, that is the acid test to see to which extent we as an industry are living up to our aspiration to be driving change. And so we ran our first DI ad industry census a year and a half ago. So we have a benchmark now in 35 countries. And we're going to be now running every other year a follow-up research in order to measure how we're progressing. And we all know that to get marketers to take stuff seriously, you need to be measuring, you need to be holding accountable, and we want to be able to also share the stuff that works best in countries around the world to make sure that we share best practice and drive change faster. So that's something that's on our agenda for next March. And then our Grow Marketer Week in Istanbul. That's going to be really exciting, I think. It's shaping up to be a great a great event in a great location. We've published our first speakers, and so we look forward to seeing many of our friends from all around the world join us in person. Because even if we do a lot of stuff remote, there are some things that you need to do in person. There are some conversations that need to be having and that weren't planned. There are some people you need to bump into that you would never have met online, and that is what inspires marketers. That's what nurtures them. That's what gets them to think out of the box. And so we do offer once a year that opportunity for people to come together.
Yeah, and such a fascinating city of the world as well. With so many things coming together in that one geographical location. It's a very interesting place to do that. Well, I know it's almost impossible for you to do this, but I'm going to ask anyway. And that is there one word or perhaps one phrase that you believe will characterize the coming year?
So I could take the easy way, which I'm not going to take, but the easy way would be the easy way would be to say 2023 is going to be uncertain, or it's going to be VUCA or whatever,
Oh no.
But my word for next year is hope, HOPE.
Good for
because
you.
I think that in flux, in change, in moments of friction, there is always the opportunity, and probably more than ever, the opportunity of changing things for the better. It's when things are in flux, that's when you can actually influence. That's when you can drive change. And that's how I want to look at 2023. Absolutely determined to drive change at a time where so many pieces are in movement.
That's a wonderful way to end this. It's a wonderful message for this season, but it's also just a great inspiration for marketers as we move forward. I can't thank you enough. It's always a joy to talk to you. I hope we're going to hear a little bit more from you in the coming year about some of these initiatives. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Deborah. A pleasure.
A pleasure. The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories.